Hello, it is Friday evening, and Merlin and I have both had our dinner, and now we are relaxing in our comfortable study. I'm sitting in my comfortable armchair. He's sitting on his comfortable knee, and we are planning our weekly message to you. One of the most common comments that I get from new viewers is that you clicked for the magnificent cat and you stayed for my words. So if you're new here for that reason, welcome. Merlin has done his job. It's up to me to do mine. If you are new to my channel, I make videos that have to do with languages, language learning, and the sake of learning languages in order to read literature and explore culture through languages. You can probably see there are a lot of books around me. I'm a scholar by calling, a professor by profession, and teaching languages and literatures and cultures has been my entire life. And my goal is to share the knowledge and experience that I have acquired there with other people who are interested in having it, so that if you're interested in exploring this same path, hopefully you can do it more easily and more efficiently. I often preface my videos by saying that there are two kinds of learners, sort of my base, my core, people who are sort of like me but younger, people who are obsessed with learning languages and want to learn lots of them, polyglots and polyglot wannabes, and then what I call normal learners, people who really aren't interested in learning a language, but for some reason have to, and therefore want to do it well. I think that's the most common type of language learner out there. But when I think about it, I think there is and should be, and I would hope that there's a third type of language learner that I would like to encourage there to be more of, and that is somebody who is sort of maybe happily in between. Not utterly obsessed with learning languages. Let's confess, most of us who are say that we have polyitis, that it is on the obsessive compulsive spectrum. And it doesn't need to be that way. It doesn't need to be also the other end of the spectrum. Oh, I have no interest in learning a language, but I have to, therefore I want to do it well. I think it'd be nice and good, and there should be people who are, like I said, somewhere in the middle, who learn languages as a form of regular mental exercise that they do. Exercise. There are, on the one end of the spectrum, we have people who run marathons, professional athletes, and the other end of the spectrum, we have couch potatoes. But we have a lot of people who are in the middle, who go running on maybe a daily basis or a couple of times a week, and I think that there should be people like that who maybe use languages as a form of mental exercise. We have spiritual exercise. People pray and meditate. Some people, monks and nuns, do this sort of as their calling, and then other people rarely do so, and then some people do so in between. And I think if people could do this in the middle, that would be a good way of sort of keeping our brains subtle. A number of years back, there was some studies that show that if you are unfortunate enough to come down with Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia, that learning a language can keep your brain subtle for another 5 or 10 years beyond when it would deteriorate otherwise. So I do think that there's a case to be made for language learning to be a form of mental exercise, and I'd like to encourage people to do that the way we do mental and we do physical and spiritual exercise. At any rate, my message for this evening, that I hope holds you here after Merlin got you here, is one that I hope will be broadly applicable. Some of my messages are specifically language oriented. Tonight I'm going to use languages as an example, but I think that the message is much broader and more applicable. And it has to do with time management. How can we best use our time? How can we divide our time and make our time most productive? If you are interested, a number of years back, I think it was very long and detailed sort of lecture style video, PowerPoint, with all sorts of information about time management that has been well received. I've talked about this at other intervals, and this evening I'm doing so in the light, really, of some videos that I made very much at the beginning of this year. And on New Year's Day, I talked about James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, which is about habit formation and the fact that we really ought to take baby steps to get into habits rather than sort of saying, I'm going to do it and try to jump into something that requires a lot of time and commitment, because that's a difficult thing to build up to. And so by taking baby steps of getting into a habit, we are more likely to ultimately succeed with it. And in that video, I mentioned that if people could possibly budget, say, 15 minutes a day, they would be able, over the course of a year, to give themselves, by using a certain type of method, a foundation in a language. And then people asked about that. So I made a video called How to Teach Yourself a Language in 15 minutes a day, which has been quite well received by many people. Some critical and wondering how you can possibly do something with such little time, but missing the point of that being that it's really an incarnation of slow and steady wins the race. I was always emphasizing that it must be systematic each and every single day, and it's not just any old 15 minutes. It's specifically 15 minutes to work your way through a book, a method like this that is designed to be done in half an hour a day over a 6-month period. So it's not so strange to say, let's do it in 15 minutes a day over the course of a year. But I also had a lot of my regular viewers say, thank you very much. That was good. We appreciated seeing the systematic steps, how you would work through a book like that in every step of the way. But what if we don't have, what if we are in the habit already of studying? And what if we don't have that time constraint? What if we have more time to put into learning? And ultimately, if you want to learn a language, 15 minutes will give you a foundation, but to learn any language well, you are going to need to study for an hour or more a day for a long period of time to get to a really more respectable, advanced level when you can truly profit from knowing the language. So that's what the message is about this evening, is let's assume that you have an hour a day, and it doesn't need to be exactly 60 minutes. Maybe it's only 45, maybe it's 90, maybe it's more, but the principle is the same. What I want to talk about is, first and foremost, continuing the basic principle and validity and necessity, I think, of what we might call time chunking, time parceling, breaking your time up into smaller chunks rather than trying to do everything all at once. And then I'll talk about what you can do specifically for learning, if you're focused on one language, how you might use an hour or two or more to do more for that one language. And then also for those of you who are interested in doing multiple languages, other languages, how you might go about doing that with a larger period of time. So again, this time management principle, I think I'm using examples from language learning. I think that language learning as a form of mental exercise, you could also do mathematics, or you could do this similarly with other things such as music or art, or many other ways of, if you are trying to, I would say, enrich your life, get on Maslow's hierarchy, get up to that self-actualization and sort of find yourself and find some practice that you can carry through that you will take to a higher level that will, yes, give a sort of a richer and deeper and more meaningful life. So let's assume that you have 60 minutes a day, not just 15 minutes a day to learn a language, to study and teach yourself a language, and you're going to still be wanting to follow the basic steps and principles that I showed you in that video of how to teach yourself a language in 15 minutes a day using Assimil's New French with Ease. So you don't just have 15 minutes, you have 60 minutes. So the first thing to talk about is, yes, continuing the basic principle of time chunking, time parceling, breaking your 60 minutes, instead of trying to do it sitting down from, say, 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. and doing it all at once. I really, to the core of my being, believe it would be better to do 15 minutes between 6 and 7, another 15 minutes, say, around lunchtime, another 15 minutes at some point later in the afternoon, and another 15 minutes later in the evening or at nighttime. So if you could possibly do your 60 minutes at 6-hour intervals, that would be ideal. Every 6 hours, do some 15 minutes of study rather than trying to do all at once. Why is that? Well, to make it memorable, I would say that there are 3 F's that we can call them. 3 things that you can do when you break your time up into smaller chunks than when you try to do it all at once. The 3 F's are focus, frequency, and flexibility. So to go through them in that order, the main and most important one, I think, is focus. Unfortunately, we human beings, if I use myself as a model and everybody else that I know, we have a hard time staying focused. We always have, and our modern society, technology, things like that are designed to sort of split our focus and pull us apart. So to stay focused on any one thing for a long period of time can be difficult. It's not so hard when it's an enjoyable thing like reading a novel or watching a movie, but when it's something challenging that requires you to cogitate, your mind tends to wander. You tend to start thinking about other things, other preoccupations. And if you want to do something like learn a language, you need to come to it focused in the first place and stay focused. And I think we can just grant that it's easier to do that for a shorter period of time than for a longer period of time. When you come to sit down to study, particularly at first thing in the morning, it might be okay. But if you're pulling yourself out of a busy day or from a busy day, it can be hard to sit down and focus in the first place. And for that reason, I have mentioned in other videos that I think it's good to preface your mental exercise of 15 minutes of study with a minute or 2 of either physical exercise. For some people, it might work to really calm your mind down, to do some sort of Tabata type intensive exercise. A minute of solid jumping jacks or something will bring your busyness of mind to a stop. And I think, though, for most people, the sort of warm-up exercise to the mental exercise of studying, akin to the stretching that you would do before going for a run or lifting weights, would be some sort of spiritual exercise. Pray for intentionality. Ask the Lord to give you focus and not to let your mind wander. Meditate. Okay? Bring your whole spirit to a focus. Do breathing exercises. Bring your mind, calm yourself down. Whatever it takes for you to get focused in the first place, if you can bring yourself to that state, and then when you come to sit and study and work at something, when you're learning, you're processing new information, you're reviewing old information, you're putting things together, you're understanding things you haven't. So that's a challenging task, and your mind should be called to that. And hopefully, for at least a short period. And I recommend 15 minutes as a nice round period. That's always worked well for me. But if you start with that and you're experimenting and maybe your mind is more fragmented from our digital world and 15 minutes is really hard, well, then you could do 6 10-minute sessions or 5 12-minute sessions. Or maybe you're less. Maybe you find 15 minutes is too short. You are still focused and you want to study a little bit longer. Then maybe you could do 3 20-minute sessions. But the basic idea of having a short period of time when you can stay focused, I think, is extremely valuable. It is possible when you feel your mind wandering to call it back, to say, hey, stop wandering, come back. But when you have to do that, you're expending energy to do that would be better spent on the actual learning process. So ideally, if you break your time into some sort of chunk, like 15 minutes, and you come into it with the right mindset and your mind is engaged while you're there, you'll be able to stay focused the entire time. So focus is the first reason for splitting a longer period of time, like 60 minutes, rather than doing 60 minutes all at one time. If you do 4 15-minute sessions spread throughout the day, you'll be more focused while you're studying and learning, and therefore you will learn a lot more. Some people make the, I think, mistaken assumption that just pure raw number of hours put into studying will be beneficial, but no, like I said, I do think that this slow and steady wins the race principle will win out over just sort of throwing yourself wholeheartedly and trying to force yourself into learning when your mind is not there. So that's focus. The second F is frequency. And frequency, again, has to do with the simple basic fact that when you're doing something like learning a language, there are two basic components. There's new information, something you've never known before. It's a new word, it's a new concept, it's a new construction. And then there is review. You need to see it over and over and over again in order for it to stick, in order for it to make sense and gel with other information to form a larger whole, a larger basis of knowledge. So when you have frequency of repetition, you're just more likely to have this process take place more efficiently. If you possibly can see your language, your words, your constructions every 6 hours rather than just once every 24 hours, obviously that is going to bring you to that degree of, shall we say, digestion, internalization, a lot quicker than if you don't do that. So the frequency, the repetition, the spaced repetition is a very important part of the entire learning process. And then the third F, finally, is the flexibility part. And that has to do with the simple fact that, again, you might say, well, if I try to do all my studying between 6 or 7 in the morning, or at noon in my lunch hour, or in the evening after I have dinner, I'm sitting here in my comfortable chair with my comfortable cat on my comfortable lap. Well, what happens if you sleep late, or if there's a meeting is called, or some friends invite you over to dinner or pop by your house? You will lose that hour. And it might not seem like the end of the world, but unfortunately, for your commitment to learning, to developing a habit of systematically studying each day, our nature is that way, that it's very hard to form and keep a good habit, and unfortunately it's very easy to break one. And the reverse is also true. It's all too easy to fall into bad habits and all too hard to break them. And if you are wanting to do something like teach yourself a language, it really does need to be a systematic daily habit. And if you break it on one day, it's so much easier to break it on the next day, and then the following day, and then basically after that, it's gone. And so, if you are having all of your studying at one time, you're always at risk of that. And even if that is not a risk, you've been doing it long enough that you're not going to lose the habit, you've lost that hour, you've lost that day, you've lost that repetition. It is going to have an impact upon your learning. It's hard if you are planning to do it between 6 and 7 and you wake up at 8 and your day is packed. When are you going to make up that hour? How are you going to compensate for that? Whereas, if you were planning on doing 15 minutes between 6 and 7 and you wake up at 8, well, you've only missed 15 minutes. You still have 3 other 15-minute sections built in throughout the day, and it's much easier to make up or compensate for those 15 minutes than it is for an entire hour. And if you can't do that, you still have the other 3 15-minute sessions. You're much less likely to break the entire habit. So these are the 3 F's, the 3 basic reasons for time chunking or time parceling, or breaking up, again, assuming we have, say, a 60-minute time period to do something like engage in some form of mental exercise like teaching ourselves a language during the course of a day. So that is the first thing that I want to talk to you about. How you should break up the time. Now let's talk about, using, again, language learning as an example, what you should do in those 60 minutes if you want to teach yourself a language effectively. So one option, as I said, for the basic principle that I was talking about in dividing your time up and recommending this company, Asimil's books for teaching yourself a language, their basic idea is that you're supposed to work through one of these manuals at a pace of about 30 minutes a day in a period of about 6 months. And so I recommended doing it in 15 minutes a day over a year. We could flip that around and say, well, one thing you could do if you have 60 minutes is do an hour a day and get through this book in 3 months. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That is one option. That's something you could try to do. And I think that probably is something that you might want to do for the first month to really get a grounding in something. However, I would say that if you believe that, okay, well, yes, you could go through this book, and then, as I said, they have this follow-up book, Using French, that I showed in the other video about continuing to study 15-minute chunks, but doing half an hour a day for another year to get to this intermediate level. You could just go through this entire series more quickly, and I think this might be attractive to that, what I call the normal learner, the people who weren't interested in the language per se, but are interested in getting to, you're being transferred to France, you are a French-speaking country, and now you need to know French where it wasn't really relevant to you before, and now it is. So, yeah, that is something you could do, try to just get through these methods more quickly. But I would say that if you think that, well, when you get through these methods, you'll be done learning the language, you'll know everything, you're not. There's always more to learn. There's always a lot more to learn. And this is, again, just giving you a solid foundation. And so you might find that might work, but you also might find that, well, it does tend to get, how can I best put this? When you want to cook something, it just needs to be in the oven for a certain amount of time at a certain temperature. You can't just turn it higher and, cook it at a higher temperature in a shorter period of time. It won't turn out right. You can't bake something or cook something that swiftly. And to, I think, a very real degree, putting a foreign language in your brain is akin to putting food in an oven. It needs to cook for a certain amount of time. It needs to percolate. It needs to simmer. And trying to force something in very quickly, it can work, particularly if you're going to go right there and be exposed to it and use it right away. It can work. But if you're failing that, it can go all too easily in one ear and out the other. So if you're not in a tremendous hurry to learn a language, if you're not going right to the country and saying, I need to know this as soon as possible to go live it and work in it, but this is some project that you're doing, if you're more of the other two kinds of learners, either the obsessed would-be polyglot who wants to learn lots of language, or somebody who on maybe a healthier level says, I want to keep training my brain. I want to do some sort of mental exercise throughout my life, the way I do physical exercise by running and mental exercise by praying or meditating or something like that. I want to keep challenging my brain. In that case, then while you might want to work through this method for a while, say a month, more intensively to get to know it, you could also, after you start getting more advanced, if you again, this is a method that works, it's called the intuitive method. It's dialogues with recordings. So you have the text in the target language. Here it's French. You have an English translation, so you know exactly what you're seeing, and you have the audio all in French, so that you can listen to it and repeat along with it. and you internalize it over time. You make it part of you, and you understand it on deeper and deeper levels. So one thing you could do, if you particularly like this level and you have 60 minutes a day, rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to sort of cram this book into me at a faster level, you could just, work with cycles or different, what are they called, ellipticals, or the old Ptolemaic sort of universe type things. You could say, rather than just using one of these, I'm going to go, and this is the most recent one, New French with Ease. I think this is about 2015, 16. And then here's French with Ease from the late 1990s. And then here's an earlier French with Ease book from, I think, the 1970s or 60s. You can get a 1950s version too. So if you have several different versions of them, they are, I think these two aren't all that different, but these are totally different. And you just have more vocabulary, more words, and you see more dialogue, and it's just more sort of sound or talk, because you have the recordings that you're listening to, and you just have more information and presentation of different materials. So if you particularly like, if that method is working well with you, you might want to explore getting different generations of it and working through them rather than just doing one at a time. Also, if you are, again, not in a tremendous hurry to get through that one book and start using the language, but say I want to take a longer time to get a more solid foundation in the language, if you can take a bit more time to get more familiar with the more advanced dialogues in the book, then you can start to realize an appreciation for some other things. And you can say, that aspect of the grammar is difficult. That aspect of the verbs is hard, the subjunctives or the literary tense. And so again, you might want to say, let me get some other types of books. I showed these grammatical exercise books. Here is an older Oxford University Press French grammar, just more traditional grammar translation type book. Other presentations, other ways of working through the material. If you're teaching yourself a language, you can work through different approaches, and in each of your 15-minute segments, you can do a different type of exercise, a different type of work, and you'll get a much more solid foundation, rounded grounding in the language and deeper understanding of it. So those are two basic options that you have of ways of using that time to work through the same language, one language, in different ways. Now, finally, for the polyglots, the would-be polyglots, the people who are interested, I also hope in that not new, but that other third type, people who are interested in languages as mental exercise. What if you have on your event horizon already, I'm not just learning French because I need it, because I'm going to this Francophone country next year, but I have a list of 5 languages that over the course of my life I'd like to master. Over the course of my life I'd like to get good and know, this handful of languages. So if you have an hour or more of time a day, rather than working just on one language, you could work on more than one language. And this is certainly a question that I get very, very frequently. Is it a good idea or a bad idea to try to do multiple languages simultaneously? And my answer to that is that you should give it a try. There are people out there who, there are languages such as Italian and Spanish and Portuguese that are really quite similar. And that if you try to learn these initially, you're at the same learning stage of each of these languages, you are probably likely to mix them up. You are likely to say, wow, that tense. That past tense is very similar. The verbs are very similar. The words are very similar, which is right, you are likely to mix them up. And more than that is going to make you speak some sort of a bastardized version, mixture of all of them rather than a pure version of any of them. In order to try to keep them straight and mix them up, you're going to need to expend energy doing that, which is a waste of energy, compared to if you could master any one of them. If you could learn Portuguese really well, then learning Spanish and or Italian would be an easy task. Your Portuguese would really help you to learn Spanish or Italian, whereas if you try to learn Spanish and Italian and Portuguese at the same time, you could have a hard time mixing them up. So there are languages like that, clearly, closely similar languages, closely related languages that you probably would be advised to get a grounding in one before moving on to the other. On the other hand, I've known plenty of people that mix up Chinese and German, which have nothing in common with each other at all, except for the fact that they're foreign languages if you're a native English speaker. And so there's really no reason to mix them up, except that your brain, I've made this analogy before, your brain is not organized. Instead of having a filing cabinet in your brain with a drawer for German and a drawer for Chinese, you've just got one box that you've labeled foreign language and you throw everything into that. And so you start, pulling out Chinese words when you want German ones or something. So that's a question of mental categorization. And there's no real reason to have any mix up with that. So basically, if you want to learn multiple languages, if you want to learn not just French, okay, but also German and Spanish and some other languages, and you have an hour or more each day to do so, then there's no reason why you should not try to learn them simultaneously. There is a reason why you should try, and if it doesn't work, you can stop and one at a time, getting it to a higher level before you move on to the next level. But there is a good reason for at least attempting it, and that is that simultaneous learning does have an inherent advantage over sequential learning. If I put all of my effort into learning French and getting French to a high level, and then stop completely to put all of my energy into learning Spanish and getting it to a high level, and then stop and put all of my energy into learning German to a high level, well, what's going to happen to my French when I'm working on my German? It's going to be forgotten. So if your goal, if your purpose is to know multiple languages, it does behoove you to try to learn them simultaneously so that you keep them all going rather than doing one, stopping, doing another, forgetting, and stopping and starting, stopping and starting, stopping and starting. So if you have a variety of languages that you want to learn, then it really does depend on the amount of time that you have budgeted. Going back to those 3 F's, I think you kind of want to have all of them on a given day. So if you have an hour a day, one thing that you could do in the same way, if you only have 15 minutes a day, you could learn one language. If you have an hour a day, you could do 4 languages, 15 minutes a day of each. That wouldn't be a bad thing. That would ultimately work if you're very systematic, if you are 100% dedicated, if you are focused, if you have the habit. However, if you want to take advantage of those 3 F's, then in order to learn 4 languages, I think you would need not 1 hour a day, but 2 hours a day. In order to get those 4 F's, to have frequency, to have that flexibility, to say, okay, I missed one of my sessions, at least I have another one. I'm not just seeing this at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm seeing it 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. I'm seeing it somewhat regular intervals. I'm seeing it more often. So if you have an hour a day, go for it. Try to learn 2 languages if you want to learn multiple languages. You can do, say, French and German would be a good choice. I think that even French and Spanish are different enough that there's no inherent reason for you to mix them up the way there might be for, say, Spanish and Italian. But yeah, French and German, certainly. If you have an hour a day, you can do them. Each of them for 30 minutes a day would be applicable, would be a valid way of using your time. If you want to do 4 languages, like I said, it's better to have 2 hours a day, and so on and so forth. So these are some of my thoughts on time management and the requests that I've had to talk about how we can use, if we do not have the time constraint, say we only have 15 minutes a day, and also if we are not new to the habit of studying, if this is something that we're committed to, how can we use our time more effectively? So I hope this was useful and beneficial to you, and I thank you for listening. And if you have done anything like this and are at a stage now where you are ready to take your language and say, yeah, I've gone through this kind of intermediate level now, and I want to continue improving my vocabulary and learning and using and learning the culture and reading literature. Here, well, you can't see down here my French books or my Spanish books. I'd like to read literature and discuss literature with you, starting very soon. You might be able to do that with me if that's of interest to you. So thank you for listening. Thank you for coming to hear me and Merlin, and I hope this was useful to you, and I will talk to you again next week.